Sup guys? In this video, I want to discuss what makes a ship good in campaign as opposed to solo bosses. The main difference between the two types of content is the number of enemies. Therefore, the deciding factor is how much space a ship's attacks occupy. Take Bayard for example, who deals a ton of damage in campaign where there are a lot of enemies on the screen. Her barrages are not targeted, so most of her barrage attacks will hit absolutely nothing if there's only a single enemy present. This means that she will perform much better in campaign relative to solo boss fights. On the other hand, Mogador's damage comes almost entirely from her main gun, all of which is targeted. This means that she won't be missing much, and she's not going to deal much more damage against multiple enemies compared to just one. In general, damage that is not targeted, like many barrages, will perform better when there are many enemies on the field to randomly absorb all the hits. And the same logic applies to other hull classes and main fleet ships as well. Torpedoes also don't have 100% hit rate on single enemies, so the more enemies there are, the more chances for the torpedoes that went wide to land on something. As for main fleet ships, dive bombers are obviously much better the more enemies there are, so a ship like Saratoga would much prefer to be used in campaign. However, that is not to say that carriers with many fighters and torpedo bombers are worse in campaign than against a single enemy. Against a single enemy, they can bring rocket fighters and aimed torpedo bombers for huge targeted damage, and then bring regular fighters and wyverns for campaign for interception and AoE damage. Wyverns generally tend to be more effective than dive bombers in campaign because their torpedoes don't disappear the moment they touch the water like bombs, so they can hit enemies that spawn after they're dropped. Basically, you can't lose if your loadout is centered around fighters or torpedo bombers, given the equipment that is available in the game right now. For battleships, it's all going to depend on their barrages because their main guns all work relatively the same. New Jersey's barrage is going to be the same thing whether there is 1 enemy or 10 enemies to hit, but Hood or Izumo would never be able to reach their full potential with just a single enemy on the screen. Some other factors that make certain ships better in campaign include ignoring shields, since there are many of those in campaign, but it doesn't have to come from a skill like Hindenburg because things like torpedoes and arcing shells naturally ignore shields. Anti-submarine warfare is also something that is almost exclusively found in campaign. And finally, you also run into mixed armor types as well. So specialists like the DDGs that can melt light armor are not going to be as good as Kawakaze, who deals high damage regardless of armor type. Oh yeah, I almost forgot, but there are ships that heal up to a certain number of times per battle, or gain a shield or heals once every certain number of seconds have passed. These skills will be much more effective in campaign, where you have to do multiple fights, and all the extra heals and shields have time to add up. That is not to say that the ships won't be good in boss fights, but obviously the longer the fight goes on for, the more impact they'll have. Okay, that's about it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.